Questions? Ram, you were the first one.
Gishima, I was just thinking that somehow it intuitively feels that the theoretical knowledge of emptiness.
Can you speak louder so everyone hears it?
Somehow it intuitively feels that theoretical knowledge of...
Yes, it seems to inherently exist intuitively, right?
No? The theoretical knowledge of emptiness
yeah.
is this pen, and emptiness is that flower actually, and there is this vast difference.
The emptiness is that flower?
I'm trying to sort of give you an example, sort of.
But, sorry, is this a flower or is it emptiness?
That is actually the direct experience of emptiness, and the theoretical knowledge is this pen.
That flower is the direct experience of emptiness?
I'm trying to convey that as an example.
You see, no, what I'm trying to get you to is to be more precise with the language. Because if you say you perceive this flower and this flower lacks inherent existence, I would agree. That when you point at the flower and you say that is the direct experience of emptiness, because the direct experience of emptiness is a mind and that is a flower.
So what I was trying to convey was that theoretical knowledge, theoretical conceptual, intellectual understanding of emptiness and the direct experience are entirely two different things.
Yes, I totally agree. Yes, absolutely.
It intuitively feels that this intellectual understanding can only take us up to ripen us to an extent, but we need something else to...
Yes, that is true. So the intellectual understanding is the stepping stone towards the direct understanding. But we need something else to ripen that, which of course is the method aspect. Love, compassion, generosity. So it's like the second wing. We need the wing that is described as the aspect of wisdom. Included in that is, of course, the direct experience and the preparatory inferential understanding or conceptual understanding of emptiness. But that conceptual understanding of emptiness can only turn into a direct experience if it is assisted by everything else, right? By love, compassion, and so forth.
But we need something...
the inspiration of a Lama. We need the inspiration of a Lama. So, yeah, we need to learn more about it, study, reflect on it, meditate. So many things. We need, a lot of causes and conditions have to come together to have the resultant direct realization. Does that make sense?
But if you are trying to intellectually understand this and without knowing that we need other factors also, isn't it reinforcing this like an intellectual constipation sort of?
Intellectual constipation. Yes, you can get caught in just that intellectual if you don't know that the goal is, it's not just knowing about, it's knowing, right? We're not aiming for knowing about, but really knowing. And yes, we can get terribly caught up in that. That is the problem if the study of Buddhism is misunderstood. Usually it's study, reflection or contemplation and meditation. But if you get just stuck in study, in just intellectual constipation, as you call it, then you'll be constipated forever. Yes, very good. Yes, that's a great danger. Yes, okay. Who else raised their hand? Oh, it's all gone on the way to the toilet. Very good. No, I'm kidding. All right, very good. Okay, so let me address one more question. Someone asked me yesterday about addiction. So difficult. These questions, they keep me busy the whole evening. I put it in my bag not to forget, but I didn't have to put it in my bag. It was like, addiction. So interesting, addiction. Well, it's terrible on one hand, of course, but actually we're all addicts. The only non-addicted person, of course, is the Buddha. Or an arhat, let's say. But, of course, here, addiction is relative. We are considered to be normal, right? And based on that, we talk about addiction. Addiction is so difficult. So the question is about an addicted person. How can we help them? What can they do to overcome the addiction, and what can we do to help them? That's how I understood the question. Okay. Now, first of all, like I said, we all have certain degrees of addiction. I can pretty much ask you addiction to chocolate, addiction to watching movies, addiction to smoking. No, that's really an addiction. Pardon? Thought patterns, yes. So things that we usually wouldn't call an addiction. Let's put it that way. Oh, addiction to food is actually, yes, considered to be a serious. So addiction to thought patterns, we all have, exactly, we all have. But then there are the addictions such as addiction to food, which are serious, like really serious. That can have serious health issues. I mean, physical health problems can lead to physical health problems, depending on what you're addicted to. If you're addicted to salad, don't worry. But addiction to chocolate and only chocolate, that could be hard. Addiction to, of course, certain substances. So what is involved in these addictions is a physical addiction. So it's not just the mental, but also the physical, which then makes it even more difficult. And I've learned, there was once a scientist once came to the IBD who taught about addiction, and he said there are actually addictive personalities, people who are more likely, and Mike would know much more about that. Mike, can you say something about what is the problem? How does that happen? Like, he explained it, but you can.
There's some heritage factors and then environmental factors.
Environmental factors. I think he talked about, for instance, the hormone that gives us happiness, like dopamine, for instance. Some people, he explained it, I don't know whether that's wrong, but he said some people have a problem with the receptors in their brain. So the dopamine is not necessarily released in ordinary circumstances in which we would experience happiness because of the release of dopamine, but that certain drugs can actually lead to the release of dopamine, and for the first time they have an actual high, which is why that difference between their previous kind of dull experiences in comparison to our experiences, since the dopamine is running freely, well, that experience gives them such a high that they're very quickly addicted. So the person who gave that explanation, he was an addict himself. He said, he was a recovering alcoholic, so, but he said that he did some research on that himself, being a neuroscientist. He said he found that there are certain addictive personalities, that not everyone has that same reaction. But we don't know whether we are or we're not. Anyway, so having said that, addiction is therefore a sickness. It's diagnosed as a sickness because of the tendencies, for one, but also then being very physical. And I don't have an answer, honestly. Someone who is addicted, if it's a physical addiction, that is so difficult. And there, the first one to, of course, first I would say it's important for them to recognize they're addicted, because a lot of denial is part of, it's a huge obstacle to taking the first step towards getting better. So to admit, to recognize you have a problem, and then focus on the negativities, not just on the high that the next, drink or shot or whatever gives you, but rather on what it does to your body. And here are the different degrees. I think it's easier to give up cigarettes versus, of course, alcohol and heroin, depending on how strong the addiction is. And how can you help such a person? I mean, I don't know anything more than you know. All I know is, like, for the family and for those loved ones, it is so difficult. It is so hard, because they sincerely want to help them, but it's like the self-destructiveness of the drugs, of course. So if any one of you, because I have no experience, I just wanted to share with you of what I came up with, modern science with these, centers that you send people to, what do you call them? Now I forget. Rehabs, yeah. These rehabilitation centers, or these rehabs, they're doing an incredible job. I don't think Buddhist centers are the right place. And Buddhist monasteries are definitely, because we don't have the experience. I mean, monks and nuns don't have any experience unless they're trained in the right way. Anyone else, any suggestion? Yes?
So you have a differentiation between the two.
So when you're in the actual recovery process, and it depends. So if you're actually, it's not even just substances at this point, typically where addiction stems from, other than just immediate substance abuse, a lot of it comes from emotional trauma. And so now you're trying to fill this void, which we could also see this in relationships, why we jump in relationships, why we pursue certain things, why there's alcoholism. So usually the reason why that's a repeated process is even if you're in recovery and say you go to AA, it doesn't solve the trauma immediately. However, say if you have rectified some of that existing trauma and you are in a recovery process, it's actually very similar to Buddhism, ironically, because the AA, the 12-step program, talks about really community. The whole 12-step program was built off the founders of like Christianity. It's a Christian-based backing, but a lot of it's more so helping people, community. Like you have this almost like sangha, if you will, and you're devoting yourself into. It's not even just a kind of about you. You have a community to support you. But it also depends because, like what kind of background and where addiction usually comes from as well. And then at that point, and this isn't even just for drugs, but when you continuously do something, it builds the neurological networks within your brain to continue. It's like why eating certain foods can be such a detrimental process, and it's like even thought processes, because when you think, your brain literally wires that way, and why neurologically you can't just like, it's like, why can't you just snap out of it? It's like physically now their brain has created these pathways, and to snap out of it it's
causes like
the longer it goes on, the more difficult it is for someone to snap out of it.
like negative physical reactions, like cold turkey kind of idea when you're like
I mean, it's literally how you experience the world. It's asking someone to change their reality immediately, which is why addiction is a very complicated topic.
Yes. I think I mean, a lot of Buddhist ideas are definitely helpful, but when you're not there yet, it's not going to do anything. I mean, therefore, these programs, I mean, do you have these programs? Of course, in India, do you have AA? I mean, based on Hinduism, for instance. It doesn't need to be, because it's good to be based on your own beliefs, actually. That would make so much more sense. But like to have treatment facilities, when you say about this trauma, that's a really good point. Because from what you just said, it makes it clear, well, about people who have addictive personalities, but maybe not everyone needs to have an addictive personality. Maybe a traumatic experience that you've never dealt with, and that gives you flashbacks and whatever else it does, to really deeply disturb your mind. And then based on that, to cope, you take drugs. It makes perfect sense. And then this whole change of our brain, of course, thought patterns. You can't be without the drug, without having certain negative physical reactions. I think a treatment facility is the best to support them, to support that person. But then, of course, can they afford it or not? So if we can financially help that person in some way, if they can't afford this facility, if they can afford it, to talk them into, but that depends on our relationship again. It's so hard. It feels like walking against a wall, because I've heard so much about people, going through these rehab programs, and then again, basically returning to their drugs and so forth. I mean, I grew up with a very famous, and you probably remember as well, of course, Beate, you remember, and Christine possibly as well, Christiane F. Right, Christiane F. I grew up with Christiane F. She was a girl in Berlin who grew up in the projects of Berlin, so a really disadvantaged area. Her mom wasn't at home most of the time. She had to work, and she started taking heroin at the age of 14 and became an addict. And her best friend died, and she was in this group of people, of addicts. And eventually she started some rehab program, and she received treatment and talked to a very popular magazine in Germany and told them her story. And her story was made into a book. with pictures of her, her friends and so forth. It was turned into a movie. And we grew up with that. We grew up with that. It was like, I don't want to become like her. And she was clean for many, many years. And then later I heard again, she went back to taking heroin. So she relapsed basically. And so just through that, we learned so much. And her story helped us, helped a lot of young people to stay away from drugs, because the way she described it and the incredible suffering. So prevention, of course, I mean, this was such an effect. It had such a great impact on my life. Although it happened, it was before she was much older than me, and still it was totally relevant, her life. Really effective. But then, of course, if someone is already an addict, then that prevention no longer works. Yeah, so sorry, I don't have an answer, really. But love and compassion and supporting them in finding some treatment is great. Yes, Rotem?
There's a main problem with every remote rehabilitation programs.
Yes. Okay.
That most of them are based on a wrong view.
Okay.
It's been told to the people
Okay.
that once you're an addict, you'll always be an addict.
Oh.
And that is very problematic point of view, in which Buddhism can really free a person.
Okay.
I'm not saying that like rehabilitation can be a very good starting point,
Yes. Okay.
but they not perpetuate, like they keep it like the addiction will never go. You have to keep on. So the trauma that is usually there, and actually the neuro path in the
Neurological
mind
pathways.
are staying the same.
Interesting.
And what we want to encourage, and what Buddhism actually does, is making new paths.
Making new pathways. Yes.
So that the mind will go, instead of going from here to here, it will go in a new direction. And that's where Buddhism can really, really help a person understanding that nothing is forever. Everything isn't permanent. You will, if you had this, and I think this is a very important thing that Buddhism can definitely do a big, big, big change.
This is beautiful, because now I can take it to Tantra. You've just provided me with a bridge, with a way to go into Tantra, because our view of ourself, our view of who we are, the view of ourselves, right? This is not, unfortunately, answering our question, but I think for someone who, yes, I think Rotem made a really good point. We start off with some of these treatment programs, but if we have some interest, to especially focus on the Buddhist aspects that deal with our unrealistic view of ourselves, with our very limiting view of ourselves. And impermanence. We had this discussion about being a victim. I was an addict. I may still have some addictive tendencies, but let's face them, we all do. Pretty much,
There's a very
right?
strong self around
Yes.
that perspective.
Yes, I'm an addict. Every time, the AA meetings, my name is Kelsang Wangmo, I'm an addict. Yeah, right, you really are enforcing that. Of course, the first step to being truthful to yourself is, of course, recognizing that. But at some point you may want to, you're right.
When you say every week, I'm an addict.
Yes,
that
you're
the
right.
addict part in your
Yeah.
becomes even, and that's the problem.
Yes, you identify with that. And when you look for a solution, of course I'm an addict, so where's the solution in drugs and so forth? Okay, good point.
In some ways, it really saves life, because sometimes the addiction, which is a strong attachment, is so severe that the only way to deal with it. So it's really important to say that in some point, because I've seen many cases of lives being saved by admitting that.
I think what you're
surrendering to this.
okay. I think
Maybe for some.
Nitsa, I think what you're getting at, that also makes sense, just of what Rotem said, but what you make sense is also in terms of someone who's an alcohol or was an alcoholic. Next time they drink, it comes back. So to be careful about that. But maybe we can still rephrase that, right? I wasn't alcoholic. So just to be aware, if you have been one, that the danger is still there. I get both of what you're saying, and both have their merits.
You know, the beginning should be definitely accepting that and
Yes, of course. But even later, to be aware that your body now and your mind is slightly different to a person. And of course, some people with addiction, I mean, there's some people who can actually drink a little bit later. There are also some levels where that is possible, but it always depends on the person, on the degree of addiction. Beata, you wanted to say something?
For me, I think it's this point of view of cognitive fusion as well. I think you can say I have this tendency and this problem or something in my brain, which makes should that's why I should be very, very careful, and it might come back. So then it makes a kind of combination of the two. But that's not me. It's not my role to be an addict, because
that's not my identity. That's just a part of my brain. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And because when you say this is my role, that's how I am, who I am, and then all the people around you will perceive you as well in that exactly role.
Very good.
That's dangerous. Then it's even more harder to get out
Yes.
of this role, and so that's.
Beata made a really good point. She really described this middle, like you are versus I have a tendency, right? That is a really good point, that we shouldn't neglect this part of our brain, this part of our mental, I don't know, tendency, if you like, but also not to identify with it. And again, that takes me back to Tantra. That's very good, because the way we present ourselves to the world based on who we think we are, that's how we're perceived, and that reinforces our sense of who we are again, right? I mean, you're an addict, I'm an addict, yeah. So let's talk about Tantra, therefore, in that context. Now, there needs to be a preparatory explanation of Tantra. What I'm going to say now is not Tantra as yet, but it's the philosophy based on which Tantra works. In the sutric system, of course, we talk about the afflictions, etc. All that is still valid, but something else is added. Our sense of being incomplete is a problem. Our sense of being incomplete on the deepest level. So in the sutric system, that deepest level isn't emphasized as much, except when we talk about Buddha nature. But it's the more superficial level that we very much deal with, and therefore we're told you're imperfect and so forth. Which of course is true. With the coarsest misperceptions, we need to be careful. But at some point, when some of the coarsest misperceptions and coarsest afflictions are no longer that strong because of a healthy sense of renunciation, a certain understanding of emptiness, certain conviction at the very least, doesn't mean it's just the view of emptiness, doesn't say you have to realize emptiness, but it's some understanding of emptiness, and of course bodhicitta, even in the contrived form. Okay, that already lessens some of your stronger afflictions, some of your more negative actions, and gives some space. And on the basis of that, we need to recognize that we're limiting ourselves by the view we have ourselves. We strongly identify being limited, being this, that, and the other. And what comes in is the sense of permanence and the sense of, well, inherent existence first. I'm inherently limited, and a sense of permanence. And even when practicing religion, it may enhance that. In the sense of, you Buddha up there, oh God, save me, oh pitiful being, right? Me pitiful being, me worthless being, and so forth. Oh Buddha, help me. Looking up at the Buddha as this great being who can maybe pull me out. And the bad news, of course, is we're told the Buddha is not omnipotent, and there's not really that much the Buddha can do other than teach us, discover your own Buddha nature within you, right? That's what the Buddha is really doing. And in Tantra in particular, Find that within you that I have too. I can't take you out of it. You need to discover it yourself. So right now, our lives are so miserable because we have a sense of being incomplete, right? Not only do we feel worthless and we feel limited, but we have a sense we're incomplete. That's why we always look for a partner. We have a sense if I'm with this person, I'll be complete. As a woman, we feel we need the presence of a man, or of another woman for that matter. Or as a man, we have the need to be with another man, with a woman or a man, depending on our tendencies. But the point is, often as a woman, we feel incomplete with someone else. As a man, we're incomplete. We feel incomplete. We always feel incomplete without another person. And society seems to suggest you're incomplete without another person, right? Every movie you watch, right? The hero needs at least a beautiful woman at his arm. Or the heroine needs some handsome guy who, you know, the prince on the white horse and so forth. So our society supports that. Therefore, Tantra is all about that. First, your sense of incompletion. And if you have two people who feel incomplete, well, thank you very much, right? We have a sense this other person is going to heal us, is going to give us everything. And before long, we have to deal with two incomplete. Well, two people who feel they're incomplete and worthless and so forth. And yeah, the whole difficulty then, of course, we know about relationships. And then maybe a third person comes in. And that leads to a lot of trouble, and a fifth, and so forth. Okay, so obviously it's very difficult. In the West also, in particular, you know, I'm thinking the way the West describes the rest of the world is so arrogant. To say third world, developed world, developing world, as if material progress has really to do with being developed or not. So the problem in the whole world now, first world, people don't use that word, but it's implied. First world, developed world, that's what I want to be, right? And then we're just carried into this material world, looking for happiness. In relationships, that's one thing, but in material objects, it's bizarre. It's bizarre, like this, how religion has, of course, replaced. On Sunday, you used to go to church. Now you go to the mall. Well, in some countries, Sunday, the mall is still closed. But in some countries, it's open and you can go to the mall and you go shopping. So this material, first of all, that's a huge problem. It totally moves us away from a path towards inner development. It's just external the whole time. Like I said, we're obsessed with the five sense objects. Everything we do is about the five sense objects. Making money to buy more sense objects. Getting a career, right? To have a certain image, Again, to do with the five sense objects, how others see us and so forth. Anyway, so I don't need to go into all this, you all know this. But we need to recognize within ourselves the sense of incompletion, of how we limit ourselves, and to understand it's all within. The change can only come from within. And if we continue with this materialistic way we live in the West, it leads to what? More divorces, more depression, more suicide, and so forth. Yeah? Therefore, material development is not the solution. We need to look to the developing world, to the third world countries. India, I think, is still considered to be a third world country, and the wisdom is found in India. This ancient wisdom, right? Not just what the Buddha taught. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very much emphasizing the ancient Indian wisdom to recover that. And one part of that is the tantric wisdom. And here, in the context of Buddhist Tantra, recognizing the divine within you. It's not about creating a second fantasy world. We live already in a certain fantasy world. What is that fantasy world? Our own limited view of who we are. reinforced, of course, by ourselves, the way we present ourselves to others. If I feel I'm worthless, if I feel like I'm limited, that's how I come across towards others. So self-confidence, we're really lacking self-confidence. We're really lacking self-confidence. There are some people who are very self-confident, but then there's the danger to turn into arrogance as well. So we need to be careful about that. But deep sense of worth, of trust that the sky is the limit. Basically what we can attain. And that's what Tantra taps into. It taps into that, exactly that low self-esteem in a very effective way. So to put you in touch with your own, I don't know how to say it, qualities of like a guru. That's why you do Guru Puja, to connect with that person, to become one with that person actually. Which you actually don't, but you discover your own qualities through the mirror of the Guru. The Guru can be a mirror in a way that first your self-centeredness is very much put right into your face. But at some point, when that has lessened, then the Guru will help you to find your own non-worldly, super mundane qualities, for lack of a better word. I mean, to put it in a word that doesn't sound, I don't know, some kind of new agey thing. No, that own incredible potential. So through Tantra, this is brought to the surface. But it needs a very skillful teacher because it can be misunderstood. On top of our image of ourselves, we may add just another unrealistic image. So without understanding emptiness, to become a deity, you're just pretending to be something else on top of the mask we're already wearing. There's the danger of putting on another mask. I mean, we're wearing these masks. We're pretending oftentimes to be someone who we'd maybe like to be. And on top of that, we have all the limited views of ourselves. So here, if Tantra is not practiced properly, of course, one danger is, as I just said, to just add another projection of who you actually are. Secondly, it can turn into arrogance. And if you start practicing on the highest level and you start actually working with the subtle energies in your body, you can seriously damage you mentally and physical. And therefore, they say certain analogies, modern analogies that are given, like nuclear energy. It's potentially, if you know to harvest it in the right way and you're careful, then there can be great benefit. It's got a lot of energy, a lot of powerful energy. But of course, we all know about the danger of nuclear. And that's why nuclear science is more or less of a secret. I mean, how to build a nuclear bomb is not something when you Google, it's like an exact description of it, obviously. Or it's sometimes described as like driving a really fast car, or even worse, like a plane, a fast plane, like a what do you call, like a jet plane, one of those really powerful supersonic kind of planes, or a rocket for that matter. If you know how to drive, if you know how to fly it, great. If you know how to drive that fast car, if you know how to fly that particular rocket, what have you, well, great. But if you don't, oof. So it's really fast. Just as Tantra can be very powerful, just like certain energy can be, like, well, nuclear energy and so forth, or it's very fast, but only if you know how to drive it, how to fly it. That needs to be understood. On one hand, of course, also, if you don't go into, it may just be useless. Unless you're qualified, you may do these practices, and the best scenario would be it doesn't even help. I mean, if you don't become totally full of yourself and you don't start to harm yourself on a physical level, at the very least, it's useless. Okay. Now, it's important to understand a few aspects of Tantra that are really important. One is being initiated. Being initiated, being empowered, as it's called. So the Tibetan word implies empowerment, or it's also translated as initiation. Literally, the Tibetan word means being empowered. Wang, which means power. So being empowered. Or Or another way to look at it, or another word is initiation, which also works. You're initiated to something. I think the Sanskrit word abhisheka, it means kind of being anointed, right? Has that way of, like, that meaning of anointed. But the point being, calling it an initiation, so you're basically introduced to a certain practice. But don't get me wrong, it's very important to understand the words of an initiation, because a lot of people run to initiations, and if they know some Tibetan, they want to hear it all in Tibetan, because now, you know, they want people to think their Tibetan is so good, so they don't want these radio things in their ears. Oh, I know so many, right? Those who just started learning Tibetan, and they want for everyone to know they know Tibetan, so they don't use the radio and don't understand the word. Well, you didn't get the initiation, sorry. Because you have to meditate. You have to meditate. It's a meditation you share with the person giving the initiation, right? So you have to really follow this meditation. It's different to a sutric teaching that is easier understood, and you understand some part of it, and that's fine. But a tantric initiation, you need to hear the words, and you need to do the meditation. You meditate with this Lama. And the Lama is making your mind, he's introducing to you a certain being, okay? Which is just a quality, it's just the perfected, usually these beings, they're just a symbolic manifestation of a certain quality that we need to develop, okay? So it puts you in touch with you, it puts you in touch with, so the deity is like the archetype of that particular quality, whether it be love, compassion, wisdom. And they are not qualities at the exclusion of anything else, but the emphasis is on compassion, for instance. Puts you in touch with this compassionate energy, if you want to use another word, or this compassion, we all carry it within us. But it's not ripened. We're limiting ourselves by our view of being not really compassionate, not really worthwhile, and so forth. Not having any worth, and not being limited in this way and the other. So first you're introduced to this being, let's say Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. And it ripens your mental continuum. It opens it. Yeah, so it's called a blessing sometimes as well, because we don't really know. Maybe science at some point will exactly define what happens in that moment, what happens to your body, what happens to your mind. But up to this point, we can only use the word blessing, because it's very hard to explain it otherwise. But something happens, something is ripened in your mental continuum. That is called an initiation. That's the first step. So very important, you can't practice it without being initiated. And just being present at an initiation, you may not receive it, but just meditating and so forth, because you need to have certain prerequisites, the three principal aspects. So as His Holiness often gives initiation, we know that those, especially the highest yoga tantric initiation, usually there's just a handful at whom the initiation is actually directed. We don't know who they are. And everyone else is just participating, and we're taking this initiation because if your mind is ready to a certain degree, you can still take it and practice it to a certain degree. But highest yoga tantra, to tell you honestly, sorry to disappoint some of you, unless you're a bodhisattva, you're not a candidate to practice highest yoga tantra. Does anyone know why?
Because a renunciation doesn't happen.
No. When you take a highest yoga tantric initiation, you take the bodhisattva vow. And what is one of the bodhisattva vows? The bodhisattva vow. Do not give up bodhicitta. If you don't have bodhicitta, how can you take the vow to not give up bodhicitta? Right? So to take the bodhisattva vow, we can take it, but we should be aware that you can only take the bodhisattva vow if you're already a bodhisattva, because otherwise there's nothing to give up. People still take it. It's okay to take it, because it leaves strong imprints in your mind. It's okay to take the vow. At a certain level, your teacher will tell you, take an initiation, take even highest yoga tantric initiation, because it's preparing your mind. But be aware, you're going through the motions, okay? And that's a good way to think about it. And focus on the Lam Rim. I know plenty of Western, and this is why I'm so hesitant about speaking a lot about Tantra or encouraging people to practice it, not because they shouldn't. It is helpful. But the problem is there are a lot of Westerners who do nothing but Tantra, highest yoga Tantra. And I don't think they're bodhisattvas, right? I don't think there are bodhisattvas. Maybe they are. Of course, I could be wrong. But that many bodhisattvas? I don't know. And their behavior doesn't necessarily... So they just want to practice Tantra. If they knew they're not really qualified candidates, they would also do other things. But they don't. And it's such a shame because, yeah, it's misunderstood. These are Tantric practitioners. How do they behave? Whoa, I'm not very inspired by this, right? That's why I'm a little bit like, don't start too early. But if you're realistic, you know you can't be a highest yoga Tantric practitioner unless a fully qualified. Well, then you know, okay, I'm not a fully qualified, but I still do it. But my focus should be on bodhicitta and emptiness. However boring it may seem to hear it again and again and again, like, oh, I've done so much bodhicitta, nothing excited about that. I want to hear about the channels and the subtle body and all that. Now, to learn about it is great, but if you get bored of anything else, there's a problem. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant talking about it. But to give you a sense of what Tantra is all about. The purpose has been, I just introduced to you the purpose to some degree, and now what you need to know is that there are 4 classes of Tantra. 4 classes. One being lower in the sense of being more of the first one, being more an introduction, and then go from there to the second, the third, and the fourth. The highest is the highest yoga Tantra. So these 4 are called Kriya Tantra, or in English, Action Tantra. Then you have Charya Tantra, which is Performance Tantra. Then you have Yoga Tantra, which is Yoga Tantra. And then you have Anuttara Yoga Tantra, or Highest Yoga Tantra. Those are the 4 classes. So Kriya, Charya, Yoga, Anuttara Yoga, or Action, Performance, Yoga, and Highest Yoga Tantra. Okay. So what does Tantra do besides helping with our low self-esteem? It also uses the ordinary, that which in sutra you stay away from, such as the afflictions, and uses them into the path. In particular, desire. Desire is a very powerful force. So it's not the afflicted aspect of desire so much as the energy. It's the bliss that it can conjure in our mind. And as I spoke about happiness, well-being, bliss, joy, not this overexcited kind of happiness and happiness coming from material objects, but the different levels of happiness that are really important. Well, bliss is very powerful. Bliss is very powerful because our mind always searches for that bliss. That's why we have no concentration. We have no concentration because we're searching all the time for that sense of well-being and happiness. This longing, always looking at something outside of ourselves. Even our thoughts reflect that. So within Tantra, you try to generate bliss. So then you're not interested in anything outside. Your mind is just focused on that. It's not dissatisfied. And it can stay on the object. It enables you to focus. So all of this, the way we learn to concentrate our mind in the sutric system, as long as you're not a candidate for these types of practices that involve the generation of bliss, you follow that path. That's good. Yeah, it's good to still focus on the breathing and so forth, and it's rewarding. It also leads to some kind of blissful experience, if you like, as a result of it, more or less, like the pliancy, physical and mental pliancies. There's also a great sense of well-being as a result of the concentration. But here is you use bliss in order to concentrate your mind. So that's one explanation that is given sometimes when they say, because of our constant need for happiness, longing for something to satisfy us, a sense of security and stability. That's what we're really, like something lasting. Security is really important. Have you ever found that in yourself, the sense of security, of stability? Yeah? You don't want it every day to be totally different. I mean, you're glad the sun is always the good old sun and so forth. You want stability at some point. Yeah, some excitement, but some stability within that excitement. And we don't find that in this impermanent, imperfect world, especially with our imperfect mind at this level, where we utilize only this coarse materialistic level of our mind. I mean, it's not materialistic, but it's interested in materialistic objects. So bliss is important, but it has to come from within, right? And then we can utilize it. But it can be triggered by external objects, but without being then, we associate that blissful object. Remember I talked about this in some of the meditations. We generate bliss or well-being as with regard to another person. Another person makes us feel good. And instead of holding on to the bliss, we hold on to the person. Right? We label beautiful, wonderful, and since we always look for happiness outside of ourselves, because we feel so limited, there's a sense I cannot. So it's always outside of ourselves, because we don't feel we can provide us with this happiness we need. So therefore, if another person makes you feel good, you hold on to the person, instead of recognizing that feeling within ourselves. It comes, I mean, was triggered by the other person, but I'm experiencing it. It's right here, it's right there. I can develop this further, right? So sometimes people use certain drugs that open their minds, like LSD, for instance. This is very dangerous, because the purpose of that is only just to recognize something in yourself, and you never have to take the drug again. Now you search for that. But people then, of course, opt to taking the drug. It's just supposed to open your mind to a certain degree. There were these projects, especially in the 70s. I don't know whether they're as prevalent today as they were then. Oh, there's new, okay. But it's really dangerous, because you want to just get them the experience once to open your mind to these possibilities and then do the work. And that's what the lamas sometimes do. They give you an experience. If you're in their presence, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, like I said that, give you this blissful experience you never had before. And then you have to work towards getting it again. But you have to do the work. The Lama is just, like I'm saying, it's like an LSD experience, which is a little cheaper than getting the action, and it's not illegal. But it's almost like I compare it to such an experience, like a mind-opening experience. So you see something within yourself that you never knew was there through the Lama. A reflection of that. But then that gives you the confidence it's there. It's within myself. And you look within yourself. And you may trigger that bliss. You may trigger that bliss, but then you utilize it to meditate. And you don't hold on to this person who gave you the bliss. In some cases, it's an external object, an external person who you're practicing with. Right? You can. So, of the 4 classes of Tantra, utilizing desire, and of course the bliss that it leads to, that energy, there are 4 levels. The first level uses very little desire. For instance, if you practice with another person who you're attracted to, or they say without that, but it's the kind of desire without another person. You don't necessarily need a person. So without having such a person, but generating the bliss that is equal to smiling at a person of attractive. Just smiling. That sense of well-being. That's the kind of bliss you now utilize to meditate. In the next level, Charya Tantra or Performance Tantra, it is holding hands. holding hands, that kind of bliss that is generated. That equals the bliss that may be generated if you hold hands. The third is embracing. The third is embracing. And the fourth is sexual union. Okay, generating that type of bliss. So that type of bliss is said to be very beneficial. Okay? All right. Based on emptiness. Bliss and emptiness. Those two are usually described in combination. Okay. Therefore, the difference between these four classes of tantras is, first of all, not only, and I get more into generating, becoming a deity and so forth, but it includes many different aspects. So usually to distinguish between these four classes, one aspect that is mentioned is that you utilize even factors that are potentially problematic, like desire. And here, that's one danger also with regard to practicing Tantra that I haven't mentioned yet. When you utilize desire in that way, well, your desire may become uncontrolled, or that bliss that is generated, and you become some kind of sex maniac. And look at online what's going on, right? What's going on when you Google Tantra? It's totally misunderstood. I mean, tantric sex. There is not even tantric sex. It's not even called sex. It's not even called, it's not ordinary. It's generating a certain physical response and then utilizing that to meditate. Right? And both practitioners, usually if there's this practice with what's called a consort, both do this equally. Both engage in these practices together. Anyway, but as I said, on the first level, it is merely from the kind of the bliss is generated, or the desire is transformed into the path. Let's put it that way. Desire coming from looking or smiling, then the second level from touching hands, then from embracing, and then from the union. But you don't need to go into the union, actually. You don't need to do that. I'm saying it's an equal, it's a bliss that arises from that. So you may, as a practitioner, generate that with an equal practitioner, or you generate it through other methods. And this is here, not saying have sex when you practice Tantra. It's actually, male and female are symbolic for method and wisdom. It's saying, complete your female aspect. I mean, often as men, we feel incomplete without a woman. As women, we feel incomplete without a man. So to complete this energy, male and female energy, that's one aspect, bringing both energies together. And also complete, most importantly, method and wisdom. Bring the two together. Because in Sutra, you can't bring the two together. There's not a single mind that practices compassion and emptiness at the same time, unless you're a Buddha. So as a Bodhisattva, either it's the method practice or the practice of, as a Sutric Bodhisattva, either it's method or it's wisdom. Never one mind is both. So here, this male and female is the union of method and wisdom, right? And as I said, the practice with a consort, male or female, depending on your own gender and your own preferences, that is done only in some cases. There are only some meditations. But you can utilize your own death to practice, right? And attain enlightenment even at the time of death. Yeah? It is said that Lama Tsongkhapa, he became enlightened at the time of death because he didn't want to take a consort, since he emphasized very much the importance of celibacy. Of course, actually, tantric practice can actually be done by a monk if it's done correctly. Because there's no, what do you call that? Forgot the word now.
Desire, attachment.
No. Anyway, never mind. I'll tell you after the break. But it's not ordinary. So there's no, never mind. Okay, we need to have lunch. She's coming. Okay, great. Please take your lunch. Yes.
The introduction was already out for 15 minutes and they're eating seconds.
I didn't know. Oh my God, I had no idea. Yes. Okay, because of the precepts. So sorry, I didn't know we had to finish earlier. Okay, please go to have your lunch because you're supposed to eat before 12. Okay.